Hello, this is Amanda Malavi with Business 312, Principles of Marketing, and today we're going to go over Chapter 19, the Global Marketplace. So we've gone through chapters 1 through 18, which we actually went through every step of this model, all the way from understanding the customer's wants and needs to identifying how to create a marketing strategy, all the way from goals to the return on investment for our marketing team. Then really going into deep dives in constructing that marketing program. And then last but not least, how to engage customers through social media, through influencers, etc. So now we're tying it into harnessing not only technology, but how do you put the marketplace in a global economy? How do you market not only to the US, but above and beyond? And then chapter 20, of course, is going to be about environmental and social responsibility, which we touched in every chapter, but that's going to tie it all in. And again, the whole reason for being in marketing is to create that customer value and that deep relationship, which again satisfies customers, builds lifetime value for you as a company, which increases share and thus increases profits. Today we have four main topics that we'll go over. One is just discussing the macro and micro environmental factors, once again, but tying it into the global economy. Then we're going to discuss key approaches in entering an international market and how to utilize marketing in those steps. And then we're going to talk about how marketing adapts their strategies to the global market as well, and some mixes. So we'll discuss the 4 Ps and how to integrate that into different countries. And then lastly, we'll go into 3 forms that a marketing organization can build their infrastructure around. So just like any other team, the finance team, the production team, marketing needs an organizational structure as well, not only in the US, but abroad. So let's go over chapter number 1, which is the macro and micro environmental factors and how marketing in a global environment is impacted by those. So today's scenario is actually the simulation that you'll be doing for chapter 19, which is in regards to Gustavo's Coffees. He's an independently owned chain of coffee stores in the Midwest, so Iowa, Illinois, etc., Michigan, and he's got his flagship in the Chicago Loop. So very cool coffee shop. People love it. It's a relaxed place to take your coffee, and it's outfitted with work cartels and comfortable seating. So they're thinking that this model worked really well in the Midwest, and so they want to go global. So let's start off with understanding the overall marketing decision process. We'll actually walk through each of these steps. So the first step is obviously to look at the overall environment, the macro and micro factors at a global level, and then we'll decide whether to go global, decide which markets we're going to enter, how we're going to enter them, decide on the marketing programs we're going to put in place at the global level, and what type of marketing organization we'll have. Let's take a look at marketing today. So what is a global firm? So a global firm, from a definition standpoint, is a company that operates in more than one country. It actually gains a lot of exposure and experience as well by gaining marketing, production, research and development, which is R&D, and financial advantages not available purely in the domestic competitors. So you're actually gaining resources and actually gaining experience globally. That should help you also in the domestic or US markets. And from a global standpoint, we look at the world as one market as well. So there's individual countries, and then there's the global market overall. So before we get started, you want to select your strategy based off of a few basic questions. One is, what market position should you try to establish in your own country, economic region, and globally? So you're, again, defining your goals. The second one is, who will your competitors be and what are their strategies? Very similar to understanding your own strategies when you are looking for a job, whether it's here in Hawaii or in other locations. The coffee shop will also try to understand How are they going to produce and source their product? How are they going to get it to whatever country they decide? And what strategic alliances can they form with other countries around the world? Is there an easy way for them to get started? Some elements that you want to take a look at are the macro and micro environmental factors. Today we're going to talk about the macro. So we'll start with the international trade system. If anything is super critical to understand, and it's all over the news today, is okay, well, it's great that you're going global, but what are the tariffs going to be? What are the taxes that you're going to have in other countries? As we heard, there's huge amounts of taxes and embargoes back and forth with any country that you decide to do business with. So really understand the tariffs and taxes. And then also remember that there's quotas. There's certainly a lot of quotas on products that we can't actually send to China or to India or to Mexico and vice versa. So understanding those is super critical before you get started into an international market. That's the international trade system. The next one is really understanding the exchange controls. Is there a limit to how much you can exchange? So, for example, you're making money in China or Australia. So, how much money can you bring back to the United States? And what's the exchange of the dollar versus the yen or versus the Australian currency? Really understand your non-tariff trade barriers and biases. There's also poor product standards that are much higher in other countries. So before you start shipping, especially a food product or a technology product, you really need to understand all the laws and any barriers to entry that may impact your overall product and marketing strategies. Another thing you really need to understand is some of the agreements. Those are super critical, and each country has different agreements. One of the biggest agreements is called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT. It was designed 61 years ago. It's a treaty. It's designed to promote world trade, and it's designed to reduce tariffs and other international trade barriers that impact us. It's really supposed to get us so that we're globally able to exchange products. So there's also the World Trade Organization, which all of you are really aware of. And what the World Trade Organization does is it enforces the GATT rules. So there's 8 rounds of negotiations to release trade barriers. So GATT is the law and the World Trade Organization is the enforcer. They have 8 rounds and they mediate disputes and they impose trade sanctions when necessary. It can be very effective, and of course it can be ineffective. But in a case that it was effective, in 1995, they reduced worldwide tariffs for manufacturing goods from 45% to 5%. And that, if you think about 1995, really helped us explode into the international marketplace and also helped us to get technology from other countries as well. You really need to understand, is there regional free trade zones? Free trade zones actually allow you not to necessarily pay taxes. And free trade zones are different places in different countries that allow for you to get that benefit. So, for example, in Hawaii, down by the port, I actually know of a great coffee seller and roaster who actually sells to Nordstrom's and Bloomingdale's, etc. And he's in a little tiny office, but it's a free trade zone office. So he doesn't have all the tax implications or rules that he has to necessarily abide. They're different. So that is super critical to understand if there's free trade zones and how you can use those. There's different trade zone associations like the European Union, Central American Trade Zone, like in Costa Rica, has a huge trade zone environment, or South American nations trade zone entity. The next thing we'll talk about is the economic, cultural, and political environments. So the economic environment, of course, is super critical when you're selecting a country. So our coffee shop guy has to decide, okay, I'm in Chicago and that's my flagship, but what country am I going to go to? He knows the tariffs, he knows all the embargo issues and the quota limits. Now he's got to go, all right, well, which one is going to be lucrative for me? So understanding the economy is super critical. There's two things that he needs to understand: the industrial structure and income distribution. Income distribution is going to impact the ability for him to sell his product. So if he's trying to sell a high-end coffee product, you need to make sure that you decide the country and even the city that's going to be able to support it from an income distribution standpoint. So let's talk about the industrial structure. There's substance economies where the majority of people engage in simple agriculture. Barter is used. That may or may not be the place where our coffee shop wants to go. More than likely, that's probably not the first area he would want to look at. There's raw materials exporting economies. He may want to go to a country where there's coffee there, where he can use some of the raw materials so he doesn't necessarily have to export everything. There's emerging economies, and the most interesting emerging economies in the world, they've actually lumped them together. It's called the BRIC countries, BRIC. And what that stands for is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. These are the fastest growing manufacturing companies and countries in the world. So those BRIC countries are super lucrative and super attractive. There's the income distribution, which of course is super critical to understand. So let's say you decide to go to, China or Brazil or India or even Canada. You need to know the income distribution. Is it low income household, middle income household, high income households? And as you know, not only do you have to understand the country, but the city that you're going to be in, because that changes based off of where you are as well. There's the legal and political environment, and again, understanding how that country's attitudes are towards your product and your country. So if some country doesn't like US products, they're not going to like US coffee, but maybe they like Hawaiian Kona coffee, or maybe they like Brazilian coffee, whatever it might be. You could still be a US company, but maybe target it based off of a different type of branding. You need to understand how the government looks at your product. So, for example, in China, if you're trying to actually export really luxurious coffee at a very high end, you're going to get taxed a lot, and you're going to have a lot of quotas that you have to abide to. So, you need to understand that. Really understand the political stability and then the monetary regulations. You need to know the exchange rates and how much money you can exchange back and forth and bring back to the United States in regards to profits. Or do you have to keep the money, a certain percentage of the money in the country? Those are all regulations you need to know. The cultural environment is super critical. Marketing is mostly impacted by the culture, how that culture is going to actually react to your marketing and your strategies. Now let's take a look at the next step, which is, all right, well, you decided you wanted to go global, but which country, and is it a go or no go for that country? So let's go there. So some factors to consider before you decide, all right, I've done my research on several countries. Am I going to go there or am I not? So again, do you understand the consumers there? If you don't understand them and haven't visited there, that's probably not a great idea. Can you compete there? Are your products attractive? Is the pricing attractive? Do people actually want it? And are you going to be able to adapt yourself to that local culture as a leader as well as a marketer? Other decisions is, can your company deal with foreign nationals? Can you communicate with them? So if you decide to go to China, uh, do you like working with them? Do you like their leadership style? Because you're going to have to change as well. Uh, do the company managers in that country have experience to sell your product? If they don't, you're probably going to have to send someone over there. So that's going to be extra cost. Or you're going to have to bring them to the United States, for example, and learn the coffee shop business in Chicago. And that's an extra cost. Also, make sure that the regulations and political environment is really considered. So there's other four things that you just really need to always make sure you understand. Define your international objectives. As always, from a marketing standpoint, a product standpoint, what are you trying to do in that country? Figure out the sales and attractiveness. Estimate how much money you're going to make out of that country. Put a P&L together, a profit and loss statement, so that you understand the exchange rates, the cost, etc., the tariffs, the quotas. Make sure that you have that those scenario-based financial reports to help guide you and to also see how well you're doing, and have those checkpoints. Also, you have to decide how many countries you're going to enter. Are you going to go to one? Are you going to go to two? And what's your timelines? Again, use that with a good financial forecasting tool like a profit and loss statement over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, so you understand your implications and the profits you're going to bring. And then also understand the types of countries you're going to go into, the geography, the income and population, and the political climate. So this slide in general gives you an overview of key items to consider. This slide is just a really great slide, giving you a visual picture of each one of those different areas, like the demographic characteristics that you need to really understand. Okay, so you decide on China or you decide on Australia. What's their education level? What's their population? What's their growth? What's their age composition? Are they going to want your product based off of that composition? The geographic considerations, the political factors, the social cultural factors, their lifestyles, beliefs, values, what's inside their black box, and then last but not least, economic factors. Really understand their growth. What does the economy say? The experts in the economy say their growth potential is. Like, again, those BRIC countries are known to be high growth entities. So again, those might be something that you consider. And then last but not least, the resources, including the financial and human resources that you can get there. You can have a great idea, but not have the managers that you need to meet your standards, and you're going to fail. So make sure you consider that as well. So now we are on, all right, the coffee shop owner decides, yep, I'm going to go international. So which market am I going to enter? So of course, we're going back to the simulation. And in the simulation in chapter 19, it then gives you data. And again, data is super critical to have. The analysis they gave us are 3 different countries that you wanted to consider. There's population, percentage of English speaking, do they like American, do they have a sentiment towards it, how many coffee shops are there, average cups per year that they have. And at the end of the day, what you chose was Australia. As you can see, it's positive to Americans. They have many coffee shops, but okay, it's a huge population, 24.9 million. They speak English. From a management perspective, it's easier. However, a GDP per capita is 56,000. China is a lot less, but again, you could have gone to more concentrated areas where it's a lot more. But Australia seemed to be the best per capita income as well, and so they could support your pricing based off of any extra fees you have to add to your tariffs of getting inside the country, or even shipping costs that you have to put on top of your product to make a profit. So the exercise or the simulation also asked, all right, well, you could have 3 more types of data that we would give you. If you only had these 3 options, which one would you take? Well, you could take the cultural data, like how much coffee, real in-depth coffee analysis. You could get competitive data on the number of coffee shops, or economic data. And since you already have a good understanding of the economy, I think that the best choice here would be the cultural. Competitive is good, but you really need to know, what are their needs and wants and desires? So the cultural data, aside from the global market data, is super critical. So in this simulation, that was the right choice. Australia, and asking for the cultural data. So let's go through objective number 2, which is understanding, well, all right, how do we get into those countries? So now that we've decided that we're going to go out to Australia, how are we going to get there? And what's going to be the best approach for you? So there's 3 decisions. One is to export your product. You can export indirect and directly, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There's joint venturing, which is getting a relationship with a company that's in Australia. And sometimes companies actually require that you have a joint venture. They won't let you go in there alone by yourself. You actually have to be somewhat sponsored through a joint venture. And then there's direct investment. China, for example, requires a percentage of direct investment. You actually have to have facilities there to produce and create jobs. So a lot of times it's a combination of all three that you do. But the key here is understanding the commitment, the risk, and the profit potential under each. Let's take a look at exporting. Exporting is really great, and there's two ways. One is to indirect export, which is taking your products and working through independent marketing intermediaries, and it's getting your product into a new country super easy. So you're going to export it in, and you'll do indirect exporting, which is working through a company that actually knows how to do it already. Then there's direct exporting, where you're going to handle your own exports. You're going to take on the investment and risk of getting your product inside without necessarily having anybody to help you. It's a really risky strategy, but it's also the biggest potential for profits. So you have to have a balance between both. Again, there's joint venturing. This is where you actually join with a foreign firm to produce or market products or services, or even have a marketing team that you joint venture with. There's 4 types of joint venturing: licensing, contract manufacturing, management contracting, joint ownership. Joint venturing differs from exporting in that the company joins a host partner to sell or market abroad. In exporting, whether it's indirect or direct, it's you on your own. So let's take a look at the different types of joint venturing. One is through licensing. There's a loyalty or a fee. And again, if there's a target on any slide, make sure you understand these. I'm just going to go over them high level. You should have a patent, a trademark, or even a trade secret. Really understand the trademark rules and laws. There's contract manufacturing. That's when a firm contracts with a manufacturer in that country. So, for example, in Australia, the coffee shop decides that it's going to manufacture everything inside the Australia, and so they're just going to ship beans, and it's going to be roasted there. And there's going to be a company that roasts for them, and that's going to be their local partner. There is management contracting. This is where domestic firms supply management skills. So again, this is a good way if you trust another company to do your marketing, or hire and manage your local staff. That would be great. And then there's also joint ownership. This is when both of you and the person that you're contracting on the other side, for example, here in Australia, your roaster, you guys are going to have a joint ownership where both of you are owners in the business, so you both have skin in the game. There's direct investment, and this is where you're going to actually go and create a facility there. So you actually create the roasting factory, and you hire, and you do that all on your own. Some advantages to doing that is the cost, and also the learnings. So remember that the law of economies of scale is the more that you learn, the cost goes down. So labor, logistics, government incentives, lower costs, raw materials, all of that's going to be a lot cheaper when you do direct investment. That's why there's a lot of incentives in these countries to do so. So let's see what the coffee company decides to do. So they can do a direct investment. This is where they develop a Cafe Gustoso in Australia that is owned and operated by the current Gustoso owners. So there is no partnership. They're just going to really invest in that in Australia. There's a joint venture where they're going to actually have an Australian investor to create the local business. And then they're going to share processes and controls. And then they could export, where they could actually produce a product in the USA and then work through an independent international intermediary to bring that product to Australia. So what's the best approach? Well, the best approach here, and the easiest because of risk, is to do a joint venture. a direct investment without having a lot of knowledge is high risk, but again, there's a lot of profit. But what you could do is start off as a joint venture and then do, after you do one shop in like Sydney, Australia, and you expand outside of Sydney, you could do a direct investment later on. You could also export to different parts of Australia. So you could do a combination of all of them. But for this specific example, the best way to get into any country is through a joint venture. Let's go through objective number 3, which is let's talk about the marketing strategies that you could deploy and the mixes for international markets. So now that we've decided what market to enter and that we're going to go through a joint venture in Australia, now you got to decide on, okay, now we've got to start marketing there. So this is the 5th step. The 5th step has several steps to it. The first one is deciding, well, what's your marketing program? There's 3 types. One is entrepreneurial, which is basically you visualize everything and you construct it, you implement it, and it's flexible. There's a formulated marketing strategy where you really develop real formal strategies, maybe even in the US, and they follow them there. And then there's an intrapreneurial marketing strategy, which is attempting to reestablish an internal entrepreneurial spirit, but still keeping your core strategies and approaches in line. So you allow the local market to really try to be local, but there's key things that they have to follow based off of the US strategy. So here is an example of Badass Coffee. It's an actual logo of a company who's actually selling in Australia, and it doesn't necessarily sell it here per se. So they're using an entrepreneurial marketing strategy, which is they try to be, have core marketing principles, but allow that local market to create their own ads. In the case of our company, the coffee shop from Chicago, they actually use the entrepreneurial marketing strategy, which is no holds barred. That company and the organization in Australia is able to actually develop their own strategies. There's also standardized marketing mix and the way that you communicate. So you know that you're going to allow them to have a lot of flexibility and be entrepreneurial in regards to the strategy you have. So are you going to use a standard marketing mix, which involves selling the same product and using the same approaches worldwide? Or are you going to have an adapted marketing mix where you adjust your marketing and you adjust your products according to the target market? Well, you know that it's always really, really key to be adaptive. But for this particular first go for this coffee company, what the best approach would be is to keep it standardized, especially in the beginning. You want to keep it the same as much as possible. And the reason being is because it's less expensive. And because the cultures of the United States and Australia are fairly similar, this is the best approach from a cost standpoint. If you were going to go to China, you might want to take the adaptive approach, which is always good in understanding your core market. So let's talk about the next step of identifying the marketing program. All right, well, now that we know that we're going to keep our current strategy and it's going to be entrepreneurial, but keep our strategies in line, what we're going to do is decide what kind of product we're going to have. And again, the first question is, what does a target market want or prefer? In this case, we know that the Australians really don't like the high sugar espresso based drinks. They want a chill type of coffee house with organic products. So would you choose a straight product extension, meaning you're going to market and then actually just send the product and be exactly like the United States? Are you going to adapt your product, or you're going to invent something new? In this particular case, we actually have to adapt. So again, you want to keep your current marketing communications methods and you want to adapt your product. So this is where you use this 5 global product and communication strategies template. And again, there's a target here, so you need to understand this because they'll be asking you how to use this. So when you don't want to change your communications, but you want to adapt your product, then that would be product adaptation. If you want to not change your product and you don't want to change your communication, then that would be straight extension, and vice versa. So please know all these different ways that you would actually communicate your marketing and how you would either change your product or not, or develop a new one, and what marketing strategy you would put into play based off of those decisions. So then once you've decided that you're going to have this product adaptation, that you're actually going to produce another product and communicate the same way as you do mostly in the United States, you have to create a promotion, of course. And again, companies can either adopt the same communication strategy they use at home or use a standardized campaigns. And in this case, we're going to use our standardized campaigns and adopt our promotions like that. Then you got to decide on pricing. Again, we're going through the 4 Ps. So from a pricing standpoint, there's a couple of options, but again, what is your target market willing to pay? Do they want the same, lower, higher price in the US? Well, that's where you would use data. And from the data standpoint, you're going to look at the poverty rates, the GDP per capita, the unemployment rate, the average income, because that all matters. And so from this example, the uniform pricing would be that you would keep the same pricing in the United States as Australia. The standard markup would be you would put a actual price, percentage above the actual price that it costs you to make. And then there's the higher or lower price. And in this particular instance, what we're going to choose is the lower price. And the reason being is because, as you can see here, we actually have lower income on average in Australia than the United States. So you can't charge the same price that you would in the United States. No one would be able to buy it. However, the GDP per capita is higher. So it does state that you can, support your product, and the unemployment rate is good. It's a lot lower than the United States. And again, this is fictitious. But from that standpoint, you know that people are going to want coffee. They're willing to buy it, but not necessarily at the same price as the United States. Next thing you're going to do is decide on your distribution channel. Are you going to have a headquarter there at the specific Australian Sydney office? Are you going to have 2 channels between the nations where you have a VP in Australia and a VP in the United States? Or are you going to have channels within a nation where the products for their you're going to move their products from their foreign point of entry to the final consumer? So are you going to basically get it there and then distribute it directly or indirectly, or are you going to have a headquarter in that specific country? So now we're going to go to learning objective number 4, the final one, which is identifying the 3 major forms of a marketing organization. So now that you know how you're going to sell it, your distribution channels, the fact that you're going to adapt your product, the fact that you're going to keep your marketing communication pretty standard, let's look at the last decision. So what type of organization am I going to build? There's a couple of things that you need to consider. What are the activities? Are they going to be establishing an exporting department with a sales manager and staff? Are you going to have an actual department there that exports and manage that whole process? Are you going to create an international division based off of geography, products, or operating units? So you're actually going to have something in that country that manages that. Or you could have an exporting or international division in the United States that manages all the marketing by location. Or are you going to have a complete global organization? So let's see what this coffee owner and the simulation says it's the best. Again, The owners are eager to come forward with an international marketing effort and want your recommendation on how to manage its international efforts. So let's take a look at the ways to do that. One is through an export department. They simply ship out the product through an export department. So they have it in Chicago, and they're just going to export the product fully made and ready to go and get it to Sydney. Or are they going to have an international division, creating an international division at Coffee Gustoso that handles all their internationally business, including joint ventures and direct investments? So they could create that international division in Australia or in the US, or are they going to have a global organization where they abandon the concept of domestic and foreign markets by investing significant resources, and so everything is there in that country? So I wanted to give you those examples. So here are the definitions and here are the examples. So what's the best approach? Well, in this particular case, there's two good decisions. One is to either create an international division or make it completely global, where you're making that investment in that country. So last but not least, you want to really make sure that you understand some key issues that could happen in marketing. One of them is really make sure that you ask for help and that you have global experts. And the reason I say that is KFC is a great brand. It's huge everywhere else. And then they went to China, and with all the money and all the marketing departments that they have, they actually released a slogan called "Finger Licking Good in China." Unfortunately, after they actually put out the ad, it actually translated to "Eat your fingers off." So again, they didn't work with their local experts to actually help them through that marketing strategy. Again, asking for help and having experts there is critical. Same thing as Got Milk. Got Milk had a huge success with Got Milk campaign. And then the Dairy Board of California, which is really close to Mexico, put out ads. And instead of really asking someone how to translate or even have reviews, their actual ad said, "Are you lactating?" So from that standpoint, these global organizations can make mistakes, but the best way to get through it is to get resources and people you trust in country, do a joint venture, and maybe have key marketing concepts that you want them to keep, but make it localized to sell best to your target market. Well, that's the end of this presentation. Mahalo for your time, and we'll see you on the last chapter 20.